Okay, what are the laws concerning the ownership of the grave sites in England? Are the graves forever?
No. There's only two cemeteries, really, both Catholic cemeteries, St Patrick's and St Mary's, Kensal Green, where graves were in perpetuity. Now, there's been a reform, so most graves now are lease, so you don't get to keep your grave. However, in saying that, well, you can, if we went today to the City of London Cemetery, you could buy something with a 35-year, 50-year or 100-year lease, and obviously it just becomes more expensive. After your 35 years, you can renew the lease if you want, but it's not as if you're going to be dug up and they're going to reuse the grave again, because we don't have that mechanism. What is in place at the moment is, if you went back 100 years, I could buy, because we bury one on top of the other, not side by side, generally. So nowadays you buy a grave for 2. You can buy a grave for 3 sometimes. Back in Dad's early days, you could buy a grave for 8. And as long as you had a long enough ladder, you could keep digging. No health and safety back in them days. Yeah, it wasn't always that. So you imagine there are thousands of graves, tens of thousands of graves, where it might be a grave for 6. There might be just 1 person or 2 people buried in it. The lease is now lapsed. And so they can reuse these graves. Because if you sell a grave for 2, you can bury 2 people without ever disturbing the people at the bottom. So that's been done at a lot of cemeteries now, reusing cemetery space, but not disinterring. Excuse me. They was bringing out at one stage, or they're trying to get past, I don't know what stage we're at with that one, something called lift and deepen. Now the idea being that you dig down, you exhume the remains that are there, put them in a chest, you keep digging, you then put that back in, and then it releases the space above for full burials again.
That's exactly what we are doing in Poland.
Oh, is it?
Although not every time with this little chest, just dig a little hole deeper and then put this bundle of remains with pieces of clothing inside it and even everything out, and you have a double space, like a new one, but everyone is still in the same place, so it's not like the remains are evicted or anything like that. And it's completely normal for Polish people because we don't have much space in Poland, so we are reusing.
It's a huge country. How can you not have space?
Not so huge.
Really? Okay.
If you look at Google Maps, everything is
concentrated,
taken already.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, by the fields and cities, villages. There's not much space for new burial grounds.
I looked at one of your YouTubes, and you was in a cemetery, and all I saw it seemed like hundreds of miles, rolling hills, and it's obviously giving me the wrong idea of Poland. So.
It's a beautiful country. Yeah, we have one of the biggest cemeteries in Europe, and I was fortunate enough to film it from a drone during the Old Saints' Day. And I think that this cemetery in Szczecin, that's the central cemetery in Szczecin, is the most lit up cemetery in the world at that time, because we have an absolute obsession with funeral lanterns, and I've never seen anything like that anywhere else. And the other thing that we have, which is unique, as I think, is benches. We have all kinds of benches, and most of them are DIY benches, because after the war there was shortage of materials, so people made benches from absolutely everything. All the boiler, for example, and everything. And I'm going to do a video about it. And my own bench as well, for my father-in-law, who was how do you call the person who shoots animals?
Hunter.
Hunter, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to incorporate elk horns and
that's
antlers,
lovely.
and yeah, it's a unique thing, I think. And how about English people? You don't use much lanterns, do you?
No, no.
I see a lot of plastic flowers.
Oh, yeah. Don't start me off on plastic flowers. It's very much a Mediterranean thing. You see a lot of our Italian Greek graves and all that. You see a lot of the lanterns and that. We've got niches here for cremated remains, and a lot of people will bring along the sort of little sort of candles, little tea light type of candles, or electric versions of the tea light.
LED ones.
Yeah. But no, it's not. I wouldn't say it was a big thing. Not unusual, but we're not obsessed with it. I mean, we're not great ones for visiting graves now, I don't think. Again, I think that's old school. You've got to remember, we do probably more cremation. We're a lot more into cremation now. And it's set cultures and religions that keep burial going, obviously with the Muslim faith. Caribbean, African, generally will want burial. Hindu, Sikh, definitely cremation. The Chinese, pretty split between cremation and burial. You know, historically there was always burial, but they've gone for cremation back home now, and so that's slowly drifted in to this country where we're seeing a bit more cremation with the Chinese culture. So yeah, it's I think what you tended to find was people that are now living here, funny enough that with the Chinese, if they was sort of been here for many years, they'd still have their old traditional ways. They're not moving on at the same pace as they would be back in China, as far as burial or cremation ritual goes.
From what I know, the Japanese have about 100% of cremations, or 99.8, something.
But they was quite interesting, because if you looked at Japan was 100% burial, and then obviously they have got limited space, and they seem to go to cremation sort of in the overall scheme of things, say overnight. But they embraced cremation, and they then have their picking of the bones as a ceremony and everything else. So
and sticking the chopsticks into the ashes.
Yeah, and so they got quite commercial on it, because, and the irony was a similar sort of thing happening in the States, where cremation started to come in with the Neptune Society, wasn't it, back in the day? And cremation started to come in. Now, the funeral directors in the States reacted by saying, you know, you wouldn't burn a dog, you know, you wouldn't, you know, it's all about, you know, where the land, everything's about the land and the land of the free and all of this. So they sold the story that anything other than burial. I mean, they wanted to sell their graves, their grave liners, the tombstone, I mean, the big coffin.
Embalming.
I mean, you could see their little world falling apart if everyone went cremation. So they did their best to fight against it. That didn't do them really any favours, because when cremation came along, so it's only cremation, why do we have to spend money? So they had, you know, the Japanese seemed to embrace it, and the Americans do it. And in fair play to the Japanese, I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen any of the images of their corporate funerals. They must spend millions on them. You know, just on flowers alone, they will take over. And of course, there's a whole kudos about it. You know, the CEO of Toyota, he'd want a bigger funeral service than the CEO of Nissan, you know, and it's definitely one-upmanship there from what I've seen. But, yeah, different attitude towards it. But I did study, back when I did my Masters on Death and Society, I went out to Thailand looking at the way the Chinese work in and did a comparative study with them and the Thais. And the Thais were very, very, you know, they would bring, I don't know how they'd cope in Poland, you know, because they would bring home parts of the bone and have it as a shrine in the corner of the room. And that was absolute key, paramount, that, you know, Nan, Grandad, Mum, that were represented in the house, and they really didn't let go.
In Indonesia, they keep the corpses in the attic, and they take them out once a year, I think, dress them, put cigarette in the mouth of someone who was a smoker, take pictures and put them back. In Madagascar, once in 10 years, they take the bodies from the crypts, and they make a huge party with music and dancing with those bodies, and put a new shroud and then put them back. So it's...
Can't see that catching on locally here.
Yeah, that won't catch on soon, I think.
We'll see on that one.
Is embalming popular in England?
Yes and no, if that's an answer. It's essential in some cultures. I mean, for example, with a lot of our African families, my Ghanaian families, I've had bodies here for 2-3 years. So it's essential that we're doing embalming to a reasonable standard to get over that, because by the time the deceased is flown back to Ghana, they still want to have a public show, so the body will still be viewing. And it is important because, you know, some cases, especially, you know, in sudden death, where they might have had a heart attack or been found and then the face is discoloured and that, you need the embalming because, you know, back in my grandfather's days, people were quite pragmatic, you know, well, that's what they're like now type of thing, you know, whereas now we want things a little bit more perfect. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, I have a team of embalmers here, and we, yeah, I would say 70% embalming. Not everybody wants to view the deceased, and therefore, you know, there's no need.
But is embalming also popular among English people?
Those that want to view, I say popular, a lot of people would turn around and say, well, what is embalming? Do we need it? And you've got to go case by case. You know, sometimes a body doesn't need embalming. It may be good for a good few days, you know.
That's right.
But unfortunately, for example, we're into a coroner's case, and it's 2 weeks before we can have the body back into our care. We're not quite sure how the case has been looked after before coming back to us. And there might be some discoloration, or, you know, might not be good, might be an accident of some sort. So, yeah, it's one of those things that not a lot of people will talk about. So, you know, some people want it discussed and want an explanation as to how it is and how it's done and what it's all about. Most people just, yeah, whatever's best.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's not get in a conversation about it. Yeah.
Are burial vaults popular in England?
I wouldn't say popular. Most of our local cemeteries, funnily enough, are installing more. But I would imagine that most of them are not going to be for our traditional English families. Some of them will still want a vault, but a lot of the Greek families, for example, you know, want vaults. We've got, funny enough, family, well, they're of Romanian descent, but a lot of them live in Canada now. Whenever they have a funeral with us, invariably they're wanting either a vault or in a catacomb somewhere. They're not really happy with an earth burial. So, I wouldn't have said, you know, they're becoming popular, but it is some of the other the other cultures and religions that we've got now that are looking for it, rather than our traditional families.
Okay, is the casket buried while the family is still present at the burial site?
Yes, and the only difference being with Caribbean and African families, they'll want to witness the grave being filled, or will want to take part in filling it in. Caribbeans will generally be wanting to fill the grave in themselves. African families are more likely to, be happy for cemetery staff to be doing it, or someone else to be doing it. Some will join in, as long as the grave's filled in. But that's because back home, you wouldn't walk away from a grave and leave it exposed because someone had come along, take the body out and run off with the casket. And they go to such extremes that my first burial back in the Volta region out in Accra, I followed the family back because I knew the boys. And very dusty days, and the casket was on show as a centre. Must have been 1,500 people turn up. We had dancers, bands, the lot. And every 5 minutes I'm there, just dusting the top of the casket, making it all look precious. And when we finally got to the graveside, the boys just picked up these rocks and stones, and it was an American, but a metal casket, and smashed every panel, dented it.
On purpose?
On purpose, and visually in front of everybody, so that people would know not to bother digging it up because the casket was spoiled anyway.
Oh, just for the casket? So they could dig up just for the casket?
Yeah.
Itself. And resell the casket?
And resell the casket.
Just replace the lining and that's a new casket?
No, don't worry about the lining.
Oh, right.
Just replace it. Yeah.
Do you have any ghost stories?
None. Do you know the amount of times I'm asked about that? But no, I've never had any experiences really of anything. Anything. I've had members of staff in the past say, but I'd call into question their judgment, but anyway, I don't know whether I was looking for a compensation claim, but no, I've never had any real experience. No.
Okay. And do you believe in ghosts?
No. It's like people ask me, do I believe in a life hereafter? I don't really have any great religious beliefs. I enjoy religion from a study point of view, and why they evolve and why people latch onto it. And I don't mock it because I give one good example where a lady or a minister that used to do a lot of work with us back in the day, lovely guy, him and his wife never had children, they just lived for each other. And when he died, I went to arrange the funeral, and she was totally at peace with losing him. And for years afterwards, we always used to go and see him because he was our local minister, and I used to go and have a cup of tea with her at Christmas. And she used to talk ever so fondly of her husband. And I questioned, when I say questioned her one day, I said, look, you've never, shown, any real great emotion. Talk about him as if he's still there. So she said, well, I'm going to be seeing him again anyway, so it's just a parting at the moment. So when I go, we're going to meet again. It's not the end. And I thought to myself, that's lovely to have that type of faith. If you ever want to cope with a loss and you've got that type of faith, then who are we to knock it? I'd love to have that type of faith to think that we're going to, but I think I'd rather just make the most of this life, just in case there's nothing on the other side. Anything on the other side is just going to be a bonus.
That's a great answer. What were the most unusual requests or situations that stand out for you throughout all these years?
On the spot, I can't think. I'm sure there must be loads. Nothing stand out because I suppose our business over the course of the years that I've been here, and it's not just because of my influence, it's just the way things are. You know, if I think before that, in Dad's days, most things were very traditional. You know, it's a bit like a McDonald's burger. You had the burger, the filling and the bun, and it's all standard. And you could jazz it up a bit, but it was just a standard funeral. Nowadays, everybody wants something just a bit different. You know, we've got a funeral, that's going to be happening soon, and everything about it is just unique to that person. I had one lady, I remember arranging her funeral with her while she was alive. You know, she knew she was dying and it was going to be a joyous day. She did a film that was going to be played back at the wake. I had to make sure I got American stretch limousines because they've invariably got a bar in them, and everyone was to drink champagne through all of it. You know, white horses. She wanted a sequined coffin, and she wanted to see it before she died. So I was up Green Street, which is where a lot of our Asian shops are, with all the sari shops. So I was able to get a fair selection of different materials. I had a particular colour I had to find, and I mean, we went on, and it was, I don't know if it was that funeral where we had 750 balloon release. Now, you have to think about that. 750 helium balloons. Can you imagine the space that takes up? You know, how do you transport them to the funeral?
That's right.
And we had to notify air traffic control because they're aluminium. You let them off in one go and it's a big blip on a radar. Mm-hmm. I mean, we could have bought the airspace over half of London to a standstill. So, there's all sorts of stuff like that that's gone on. And very often you carry out a funeral and you think to yourself, there could only be one person in that coffin just when you look at the funeral. Do you know, and like funeral services as well. They become very bespoke and totally unique. And which is how it should be, really. You know, we're all individuals. So why shouldn't a funeral represent that individualism?
What is the best and the worst thing about this job?
I shouldn't be saying this, but the general public.
The living.
Yeah, the living. Do you know, some days most days you come in and you really, you can walk away and think, do you know what? I've made a difference. Other days, you can meet some not so nice people. But I suppose the world's always been like that. But it can be your best experience or your worst experience. But you like to remember the best ones. And you do. I think any funeral director really that's worth their salts would probably say the same thing, because it's what you do. It is a great experience when people say, thank you, and you've given them a good memory, and there is nothing better than a family. It's a different one to explain.
I know what you
It's
mean.
a thanks, but it goes beyond a thank you. You really feel as though you've made a difference, and that's a good feeling.
It's a feeling of pride that no money can buy for me.
Yeah, yeah. That's the reason you get up of a morning, because you don't get up to make someone's day worse. In our profession, you get up to make things better for someone. I do a little sort of intro talk for our local children's hospice for new doctors, new nurses, about what can happen, what can't happen as far as funerals go, a bit of the legalities around funerals and that. And I'll never forget when one of the nurses turned around to me as I was coming out and said, "Oh, I don't know how you do your job." And I said to her, I said, do you know, it's funny, I said, but I could say the same about yours.
Exactly.
I couldn't imagine. I go around there and I could come away in absolute tears. And I think, I could not do this job.
It's horrifying.
Everything, you know? And I take my hat off to them. By the time that family comes into us, the worst has happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the worst has happened. And for us, you're not carrying out a repair, but you are then there to help that family through, you know, what is the worst time of their life. So you can make not make things better. That's, you know, a bit bland, but you feel as though, yeah, that's exactly right. But I remember we had a young girl from there that came round and wanted to arrange her own funeral, and she was in a chair, limited life expectancy. Beautiful girl, you know. And she wanted to do a pre-arranged funeral. And I think it's the one time when I've chickened out about arranging a funeral. I just couldn't do it. I was lucky because Sarah, my middle daughter, was here, and I sort of made some lame excuse, and I sort of said, "Oh, it would be much nicer if, you know, you speak to someone, you know, another young girl." And they did. They got on famously, and they talked about the colours and the dresses and all that. And you think, you know, I thought, yeah. Well done, John, you got out of that one. Because, yeah, there's sometimes, and you do get families that, you know, you can't do this job if you're hard. You know, equally so, you can't take everyone home with you because you'd be no good. So you have to find that balance, which, yeah, with some families it's easier, some not so easy.
From my experience, some people are thinking that the undertakers or people from the funeral industry are happy that someone is dying, while this is absolutely ridiculous, of course, and because people are dying anyway, and we have nothing to do that. We have nothing with their dead, and we are not the cause of their death. So did you experience something like that?
Do you know what?
Like you're cool or something?
My great uncle Tom Cribb had the best answer to that. He was a man of few words, and his answer to that was always, "I don't want to hear of anyone dying, but if they do, please God, they come to us." And that was it really, and that sort of sums it up, I suppose. And you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, you're not causing any deaths at all, and you know, you're there to pick up the pieces, really.
Exactly. Okay, last question. What do you think the funerals and cemeteries will look like in 100 years from now?
I'd like to think the cemeteries are not going to change much. I think we have such a lot of history. You know, I love our old cemeteries, the architecture of them. I feel, you know, we haven't added much to that architecture. There's, you know, the lawn-type graves and all that don't exactly inspire you when you see them.
Bland and boring for me.
Yeah. And, you know, I loved the way we had that show of opulence, you know. But I don't know, really. I have seen, you know, we had the question earlier on as regards, you know, vaults. If you go over to some cemeteries, some of those vaults, that's just a sad excuse. But I do like some of the this sort of mausolea that are being built. They look quite nice. I don't see as there's going to be too many changes. I mean, I think there's going to be more cremation. I have seen, only in the last few years, with some of our African families and Caribbean families, we're getting a bit of cremation creeping in, which we never saw before. a lot of our cemeteries now, if you take in the east end of London, we've got a growing Muslim population which dominates most of our, they have their own cemeteries, and there's you don't see any architecture as such going into them as far as memorials go.
And no cremation at all?
No cremation, no. No. It's one of those strange things that it depends. I mean, everything goes back to like with the Jewish faith, the Orthodox Jews, they sort of go back to the fact that we bury and that's it, this is what it is in the Quran or whatever, therefore I can't see that ever changing. But some of the other cultures, are changing, as I say, predominantly with the African and Caribbean. I've seen the change in the Chinese. It was predominantly burial, a few years back. We're probably getting a bit more cremation now than burial. Well, it's 50-50 split, I suppose. But a change. But I can't, what we're having to do is, go out further and further as far as burial space goes. But I do feel sooner or later the lift and deepen will sort of finally be used to its better, fullest extent. Because if you looked at Mediterranean type cemeteries, for example, you look at the Spanish, Italian cemetery, they always look, quite vibrant. There's always activity, there's always flowers, and they seem to be busy places, well maintained and that. Why? Because you don't get to sit in there for long. After about 10 years, the bones are taken out, put into a charnel, it's rested on again, and so the cemetery lives on. But our cemeteries fall into decay because we're not reusing them. So I'd like to feel that, the whole lift and deepen will become common practice, and perhaps, for want of a better expression, we'll get some life back into our cemeteries.
There's a lot of old mausolea.
Mausolea. Mm.
Okay, I always said mausoleums. Well,
Mausoleum's good, yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of them I've seen in Ireland or in England as well. Beautiful ones, Gothic ones, and you peek inside and you see those scattered bones and skulls laying around. And what was something that was meant to be respectful and beautiful had fallen into decay, and there's nobody living to care for that, and it would cost a ton of money as well. So does it make any sense?
Yeah, but we don't do ourselves any favour. One of the things that I always find sad is when you look at somewhere like St Martin's in the Field, a well-known church, with its crypts, and back in the day people would have bought vaults within there in perpetuity, family vaults. They could have probably paid endowments, for masses to be said and all the rest of it. Only for us to come along in a generation, clear it all out, put a nice caff in there, and you think, that's sad that we just destroy stuff like that. And yet, I'll try and get an exhumation done for good reason, for what family feel are good reasons to exhume from a church burial ground, and it'll get refused on a whim. And you think to yourself, God, it's a bit of hypocrisy going on along the way. That sort of, we get involved in an awful lot of exhumations. We're at present on HS2, which is our high-speed link. So, we're exhuming whole cemeteries for development. So I sort of get it. And when you've got... See, the problem is, if you looked at the footprint of London, if we went back to medieval times, it was all hamlets and little towns, and every hamlet, every town, every village had a church, every church had a churchyard, and then you had the Quakers, the Methodists, and every other person having cemeteries. So it was an absolute patchwork, London, of cemeteries. Well, you know, as it's grown into the metropolis, obviously there's been a lot of exhumations to make way. So you can make a good argument. You need the space, as long as it's done respectfully. But yeah, we've been involved in quite a few interesting ones actually, moving thousands of bodies.
Wow.
But a story for another day.
Do you have your own funeral figured out?
Good question. Often asked that. No is a simple answer. I've often said I would be buried, and I think I'd want a space where I was right on the curbside on a bend in a cemetery, and just as other funeral directors have come round, it's just an obstacle for them. Just because
a big rock.
Yeah, and if they catch their hearse on it, they think that he was a bugger when he was alive and he's doing it in death. So that would be the way I'd want to be remembered, I think. But no, I think I would certainly want a funeral. You know, I still think funerals are important.
But do you want your organic remains to return to the circle of life, to nature?
I'm toying between that and a lead shell and case. So I might buck the trend. I like tradition.
Me too.
Simple as that. So whatever it is, it'd be down to the kids to sort out, but it'd have to be tradition.
I would like to thank you very much. That was a real pleasure and delight.
No, it's been interesting having the chat.
I would love to do that again sometime.
I'm sure there'll be more in the future.
Questions.
There's a lot more to talk about.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well done. Thank you.
Let me shake your hand.
Perfect.